Hey, folks,
Hello,
welcome
hello.
to our coming to you live from Toronto and
Nice.
area.
Yeah.
My name is Joel Vardy, and I'm here with my buddy Josh. Hey, Josh.
How you doing?
Doing great, doing great. It's Thursday. It's almost the weekend.
It's almost the weekend.
It's like Friday Eve.
Friday Eve, yeah.
Cool, cool, cool. Here talking today about how to migrate to Jamstack in 5 steps. But this is a lunch and learn. So what's different from a lunch and learn and like a webinar?
Lunch and learn, we kind of keep them, compact, provide, quite a bit of information in a short amount of time. Um, yeah, just something for people to tune in while they're having lunch and learn something about either, our system or just something about the space in general.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right into the content. First thing to do is talk about ourselves. So, my name is Joel Vardy. I am president and CTO here at Agility. Been with Agility for quite some time. Love to talk about Jamstack. Love to talk about website development and architecture and stuff like that. And Josh, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm front-end developer here at Agility. I've been here almost 2 years now, and I love working with the Jamstack.
Yeah, awesome. And what's really interesting about Josh is he works on our basically he has worked as a solution architect, as a support developer. He has worked as like all kinds of stuff. He has built. He worked on our website, and he has built all kinds of stuff. But also is working on our product as well. So we have a whole new product interface coming out, and Josh is one of the lead developers on that. So awesome, Josh! Great to have you on the team, and let's do this.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk today about what is the Jamstack. We're going to talk about moving to the Jamstack, and I got a bunch of slides on that, which are exciting. We're going to talk about choosing a CMS because I think that goes hand in hand. Obviously, we're coming to you as Agility CMS, but moving to the Jamstack often happens when people are moving off of a monolithic platform and a sort of an older CMS. You're going to want to choose a development framework and choose a hosting solution. So let's dive into those. Josh, why don't you
Yeah, great.
tell us what is the Jamstack?
Yeah, so the Jamstack is essentially a term for modern web development, kind of an architecture that's based on three main components. One of them being JavaScript, the second being reusable APIs, and last but not least, markup, HTML markup. So most of us probably already know what JavaScript is, but JavaScript is a popular browser language that essentially allows you to create dynamic functionality and interactivity within your websites. Um, in terms of APIs, so for server-side operations, these are usually abstracted into reusable APIs that are accessed, over HTTPS via JavaScript. And there are many different, APIs. You can have APIs for search, authentication, e-commerce, even CMS solutions. And last but not least, we have markup. So in Jamstack websites, the websites are served as HTML static files, which essentially can be generated from source files or from data, that is accessed from an API, and using static site generators.
Right. So I think it's, yeah. And this Jamstack has been around for a few years as kind of the modern way to build websites, right? And I don't think it has totally supplanted things like .NET or Java or PHP. I prefer it huge because it means front end developers can do a huge part of the work. I think that's one of the things that I like about it the most. And it's also a really friendly community
Mm-hmm.
of people, right? Because
Yeah,
people who are doing Jamstack stuff, they tend to be a little bit more inclusive. Not to say that the other, folks aren't inclusive, but Jamstack is super inclusive.
yeah.
And it's a really great thing to be a part of. So if you're coming to it new, or if you're coming to it as, well, I thought it was this thing, but I want to try this other thing, then there's lots to learn. And the people that are part of this community really want to help you. And,
Yeah.
Josh and I are part of that community too.
Yeah, what I also love about it is the API part of things. It's kind of like plug and play. So if you use
Mm,
like one search provider and you find out that, it's not really working for me, you can easily switch over to, a different provider and, something that
right.
might work better for you. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and those API, there are so many APIs out there, and pretty much every sort of cloud framework now, or sort of
Hmm.
service or product, is available as an API, and so you can kind of mix and match, as you were saying. We call that composability
Hmm.
as part of using a framework. So that's really awesome. Let's talk about some of the benefits of Jamstack, and there's a lot of things that are huge, sort of level up on older stuff. And one of the first things is faster performance. And you talked about serving static websites. Hey, Harry, how's it going? Just on a live webinar here, so it's awesome. Real world. Faster performance. So you're going to serve sort of static HTML pages that have been generated, but there's a lot of different ways to generate those. Like I could hand code my HTML pages and just put them out there, but you talked about sort of rendering those and pre-rendering those. What are some of the ways that pages can be pre-rendered?
Yeah, so you can, render it as a completely static site. So your files are cached and, it's super fast
Mhm.
websites. You can also have your website server rendered, server-side rendering. So each time someone makes a request to the page, it's going to get that fresh data every time.
Right. And then there's a couple ways in the middle there where we've got so there's a static rendering where it's built as part of like a DevOps pipeline. So it's
Hmm.
not built on demand. Then we have server rendering, but in the middle, there's some of these sites have like incremental
Incremental.
generation where it's
Yeah,
like it'll build it once, but it only build it once as it's needed every few minutes or so, something like that.
right.
So lots of different ways. But the net effect is you just get really, really fast performance for these sites. The next one is more secure. So I think this kind of comes into the idea of we pre-built these pages and put them out there on the internet or
Hmm.
behind a CDN, and because they're pre-built, we don't have to worry nearly so much about database vulnerabilities. It doesn't mean you don't have to worry at all, but
Yep.
it means like the attack surface is much smaller because we don't essentially have our PHP or Java or .NET code sort of exposed outside of the internet. We're going to have when we build our website, we're going to call these other APIs that are essentially they have their own security layers,
Hmm.
and so our site ends up being way way more secure. So it's faster, it's more secure. I mean, I'm already sold already, but as a developer, tell me about the developer experience, how that's better than doing other stuff.
Yeah, so with Jamstack, you can have your front-end developers essentially focus on the front end, right? And they're not really tied to monolithical architecture, something like WordPress, where you have your backend and your front end tightly coupled together. And you also have kind of like a component-driven, I'd say, development, right? So you can worry
Right.
about building components that make up your website as opposed to building your entire website in general. So I like working with smaller components and using those components to big out a bigger application.
Right. And it's interesting too. It's from a JavaScript development point of view, especially if we're going to talk about these frameworks in a little while, but I can spend more of my time in the framework as opposed to doing like full stack stuff because I'm already using these APIs that are ready to go. So I can think about what the interface is going to be as opposed to worrying about the back
Right.
end. And then scalability. So, obviously we talked about performance and it's like already faster and more secure. How is that different from scalability in terms of like one of my website? Like, are you talking about when I get like a large number of people come to my website all at once? It's like kind of like a Black Friday thing.
Hmm.
Is that what this means?
Yeah, yeah. So when you have your Jamstack website, you usually have it, hosted on some sort of CDN. And
Hmm.
if you get a bunch of traffic, your website might go viral one day. You don't have to worry too much because usually these CDNs can scale automatically and
Hmm.
kind of adapt to the amount of traffic you're getting. So
Right.
that's definitely another benefit of the Jamstack and deploying on a CDN solution.
Yeah. So the scalability, I mean, there's a couple different ways that I look at it. I mean,
Hmm.
we one of our major customers is Cineplex, and
Hmm.
I can remember back in the olden days when Cineplex. So currently, Cineplex is actually on a Jamstack website now. They're on Next.js.
Yeah.
But back in the old days, it was on like .NET and an
Hmm.
older framework. And every Friday, and it wasn't behind the CDN. And every Friday at 4 o'clock, the site because would just get hammered.
Yeah.
We'd see the CPUs go crazy, and it was really tough. So that was on a regular basis. Then you have sometimes where, as you say, you go viral. If somebody
Hmm.
posts, a link to you on Twitter or something like that. I remember one of our other customers. There was like an announcement that went out on Twitter from like a TV station or something, and then all of the traffic went over, and that was the highest peak they'd ever had at a
Hmm.
single time. And because they were behind a CDN, it was okay. So pretty cool how you can get performance, but scalability is a little bit different from that. All right,
Yeah.
let's dive in. By the way, this is a live session, so we are here to answer questions. So if anyone
Hmm.
has a question, we can actually bring you up on stage if you have a question, if you want to ask it on stage, or just throw it over in the chat, and then we'll answer it as we go. And I'm pretty sure we're recording this as well, so this is going to go out on
Yep.
on our YouTube channel. And so if you have questions there, then you can shoot us. Just talk to us. Reach out to us on Twitter or whatever. At Agility CMS on Twitter is a great way to contact us, or you can jump on our Slack channel as well. Okay, So let's talk about moving to Jamstack. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. First of all, you could completely rebuild the site.
Mhm.
This is assuming that you aren't just going to completely rebuild the site. You want to do this kind of piece by piece. So in a page by page situation, you can use a CDN like Vercel, Netlify, Cloudflare. There's a bunch of other ways to do this to route to a different origin. So it's always a good thing to put our site behind a CDN.
Mhm.
And I think that's always a good thing. It's not necessarily trivial to do, but when we do that, we can say, you know what, our homepage, maybe just the homepage is one that we're really worried about. We can just have that one route to a different backend. And we've talked about this before, and it definitely reach out to us on strategies for doing this. And it goes hand in hand with, you can do it either page by page, or you can do a whole section by section of your website. We've got a bunch of customers that have done this, where they've moved from like a PHP or a .NET kind of site slowly by saying, hey, you know what, our members area is the only one
Mhm.
that's not going to be moved over. We're going to do everything else. And I've actually got an example of how we do this with our documentation site. So
Yeah.
we used to have a site called help.agilitysms.com, which was like Zendesk
Powered by Zendesk.
documentation,
Yeah.
right? And we moved it to, now what is it powered by now? It's a whole different framework, right?
Yeah. So our doc site is on Next.js and hosted on Vercel.
Right. But our main site is on
Is
Gatsby,
Yeah, hosted
hosted
on
on
Netlify.
Netlify. So I have some slides. I actually took screenshots of how this is all set up. And I'm going to show this one because this is a really common way to move to Jamstack without having to rebuild your entire website. So another thing that you talked about is really important, Josh, is content import. So why is this kind of an important thing when you're moving to Jamstack?
Yeah, obviously you want to make sure you can, port your content across from your old platform to the new platform. And Agility makes this really easy with the content management API. So with the content management
Right.
API, you can essentially, programmatically import, create, and delete content in Agility. So we kind of make it really easy for you guys to port your content over from your old monolithical platform to a new headless CMS.
Yeah, and that answers the question of, well, what do I do with all my old stuff that I have somewhere? It's in a database, or it's in
Hmm.
WordPress, or it's in some other old CMS. You can easily import that content in and get started moving it all over.
Yep.
And then we talk about caching strategy. So your current site's probably, I'm going to take a guess, it's probably a server rendered website, possibly with a CDN in front, but possibly not. But with Jamstack, we can pick our rendering strategy about how we want our content to be served on web pages.
Mhm.
And we talked about. So let's just go through the different rendering strategies that on top of it. So you've already talked about server rendering. So that means on every time I hit a certain page, it's going to run a bunch of code on a server and then deliver that to me as HTML. So that's
Yep.
server rendering. What are some of the other rendering strategies?
So you have static site generation that basically builds your site beforehand and serves
Right,
all of these static files. So your site is really quick. And then you
right,
have incremental static regeneration, which you explained a bit earlier.
right,
That's it builds your site and caches it locally, but then every time content is updated, it'll kind of listen to those changes and just update
right,
what has changed. So it's not rebuilding your
right.
entire site, but just little pieces here and there that
Right.
have been
And that
updated.
is still happening on a server, right?
Yep.
It could be on a serverless resource. So
Mhm.
some of the frameworks we look at, it actually runs on what's called a serverless function. So I don't have to run a server, but
Yep.
it's still going to run some code. There's also a new kind of way of rendering that's sort of edge rendering, which now the code is actually going to run on the CDN itself, in the same space where the caching happens.
Mhm.
And that's a really interesting way, those are called edge functions, and we can do a lot of stuff in an edge function. And we're not going to get too deep into that, but it's certainly something to consider when you're moving to the Jamstack.
Yep.
So here's an example of how we moved our agility documentation site away from away from the Zendesk pre-rendered thing, because we didn't have as much control. We wanted to have it so all of this content is into agility. So we imported all the content from Zendesk, or some of it, into agility, wrote a bunch of articles. We built the site. So actually, you were part of this build, Josh. So building the site. So it's hosted as a Next.js site on Vercel. So the Vercel URL that it's given to us is agilitymS.documentation-site.vercel.app. But the actual site is not there, right?
No, the actual site's pointing to agilitycms.com/docs.
Right. So the agilitymS.com site is actually hosted on Netlify. So this is a screenshot of our Netlify page. You can see that's on the Netlify logo there, and agilitymS.com. So how do we actually do this? And the trick is actually and every CDN provider has a different way to do this. To serve this. So you can see actually jodycms.com/docs, that's the site there. That's the same site as is coming from Vercel. So the way to do that is actually really simple. This is the code. I took a screenshot of Visual Studio Code, and you can see I highlighted in the _redirects file. There's a couple different ways to do this in Netlify. You can see /docs is being redirected to that same URL /docs. So there's actually two things. One for the main, like the home page of it, and then the rest is called a splat. That's like a --star for everything else. So, and you can see we've got a whole bunch of different redirects that we've done here to make this work. So that's a deeper conversation for how to do this. You can do it with Netlify, you can do it with Vercel, you can do it with Cloudflare, tons of other different CDN providers out there allow you to do this. So really exciting.
Yep.
And by the way, any questions on how to do that, just throw them in the chat at any time. Let's talk about choosing a headless CMS. Now, Josh, you get this a lot because you do a lot of work with existing customers and stuff like that, and talking about benefits. Actually, you sit on some sales calls. I sit on some sales calls, so it's good. As a developer, it's good to be part of like non-development things sometimes to hear sort of what everyone talks about. Talk to me about security and permissions when people are evaluating CMS. I think that's one of the top things that tends to come up.
Yeah, so security and permission is definitely important when evaluating headless CMS or any CMS in general. But you want to make sure you can get your CMS hosted in a data center near you, right? You want your content to be served as fast as possible, your assets to be served as fast as possible. So that's one big thing. Where's the CMS hosted? Can I get a data center near me?
Right. And why would that be like, is there, so sometimes like we have data centers in like Europe, Australia, Canada, US. I think for us, like some folks say, well, my data has to be in Europe. And it seems to be that each different region has their own kind of rules for that.
Yeah, either for rules and legal reasons, they have to have their data stored in, their own.
So you might want to have it near you, but you also might want to have it sort of in a certain region because of certain like compliance and stuff. So that's a really important consideration.
Exactly. Next up, you also want to make sure your CMS has a disaster recovery plan. You always want to make sure your content is safe and is recoverable. Can you get your content back when God forbid something has happened? Last but not least, does it support SSO? A lot of our enterprise customers, they're looking for SSO, and you want to make sure your CMS that you're choosing supports that as well.
This is so they don't need to have another password, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Like, does it make me have a password? I hate that. I don't want to have another password.
I just want to be
logged into my thing. Okay, awesome. And then the actual content management itself. And this is an interesting one. The top bullet, SEO is like one of the top things people care about, right? Because organic traffic, and I want to be able to be found, all that sort of stuff for search engines. But for a headless CMS, how is this kind of linked to what's going on with the headless CMS in terms of SEO?
Well, in your content management system, oftentimes you're creating pages and you want those pages to be SEO friendly, right? So you want to make sure your CMS platform allows you to, edit that metadata that's being created for every page. Can you edit the meta title, the meta description? Can you add OG images? Google Analytics scripts. You want to make sure you're able to, support all those scenarios.
Right. Yeah, and then being able to preview content, that's a huge one. I know that just clicking that preview button so I can see what's going on, exactly what's going to be there. That's a huge one for content authors, so that they can know and feel confident in what's going to be there once they click publish, right?
Yep, exactly. And last up is the content authoring UI easy to use. Is it easy for me to log into the system and create a new blog post or create a new page? We want to make it as easy as possible for all of the content editors in the system.
Right. And then we talk about APIs. Now, so when we're talking about, remember with Jamstack, a big part of it is the APIs. Well, one of the most important APIs you're going to be interacting with is your headless CMS. That's where all the content for your website is going to come from. And you want to make sure that CMS has a really mature API or SDKs for those APIs in your framework.
Exactly.
That's really important. And you talked before about tools for migrating content using a management API. So we're going to have an API to pull content out of the system, and should have an API to push content into the system, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Now, what do you mean by extensibility, though? So I've got APIs to get data in and out. What does
Mhm.
the extensibility API talk about?
Yeah, so oftentimes you want to extend the CMS and make sure it has further capabilities. So for example, maybe you want to integrate with a form provider. You want to add
Right.
forms to your website. It'd be nice if you could create a custom field that allows you to select a form from FormStack or HubSpot and kind of embed that right into your website.
Right.
So with custom apps and custom fields, you can really extend the CMS to kind of make content authoring really easy for your editors.
Okay. Well, then let's talk about Agility CMS because you got the T-shirt on and everything, and
Yeah.
we know a little bit about Agility CMS. Talk to me about the things about Agility CMS, the top benefits that we think people should look at when they're looking at a headless CMS.
Yeah, so the first up here we have is intuitive authoring experience. So with Agility, it's easy to it's easy to use the authoring experience. Makes it really easy for non-technical users to create and structure their content and also move content and pages around in your system.
Right. Yeah, most headless CMSs don't have any concept of a page at
Of
all.
pages,
You have
yeah,
to kind of kludge it on there. Yeah.
yeah. Next up here, we have faster development. So with Agility, it makes it really, really easy to build solutions with rich features such as page management, sitemap management, URL routing, and having mature APIs and SDKs. So like Joel mentioned, we have APIs to create contents, we have APIs to retrieve contents, and also SDKs to create custom apps and extend the CMS itself.
Right. Awesome. And what is on? And so I think that's a pretty obvious benefit. Hey, you
Mhm.
can do stuff faster, right?
Yeah,
You stuff faster and empower your marketers to be able to work with those pages more quickly.
yeah.
What does omnichannel delivery mean?
Yeah, so omnichannel delivery, what that means is essentially you can have one system, but share your content to multiple different platforms. So you can use
Right.
Agility to, power content on your websites, as well as content on your mobile app. You might even have like digital signage that you want to reuse content for, so you can ship content right to your digital signage. So just having
Right.
one area and multiple touch points across your customer journey.
Okay. So create a single source of truth for all my content to for all the destinations that's going to go to. So
Exactly.
yeah, tons of reasons to choose Agility CMS, and I'm sure there's even more. Wait, there's even a 50-point checklist for choosing a headless CMS. So this is a great resource that our team put together for helping to choose a headless CMS. I'm going to throw the link in the chat here. This is definitely a good one to go and download and to read through, right?
Yeah.
This is for a lot of different teams. They want to have a reason, especially once you choose a headless CMS. This helps you go back to the leadership within your company to
Mhm.
help convince everybody else why the choice you made was a good one. So that's definitely a great resource to have.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, here's an interesting one. Let's talk about choosing a framework. So you need to decide sort of we talked about all these different ways of serving up content. You can have like static generation, server rendering, all these different things.
Mhm.
And we only went with three. So we picked three of the sort of the top ones. Why did you pick these three, Josh?
Um, Well, Next.js, I had to throw this in here because it's my favorite framework by far. So I had to throw that one in here. But these are definitely, like you said, the most popular frameworks, or sorry, static site generators that are used to, serve static content and pages. So first up here, we have Next.js. Obviously, Next.js is a React-based framework. With Next.js, you can opt into either static site generation or server-side rendering, which is really nice, and you can do that on a per page basis. So if one page you want static, but the other site page you want server-side rendered, you can
Mm,
totally do that. And you can still do your client-side code within
right,
Next.js as well, which is really nice. It also has image optimization with the next image component, which is really nice. So, transform your images to WebP, make sure they're smaller. And, you're not serving massive file sizes, and also API routes, which is really nice. So it allows you to do, server-side code in a small little API file, which is really nice. It makes you feel like a back-end developer almost, working
right.
in one small framework. Hot reloading, so as you're making code changes and while you're developing, automatically updates right in front of your eyes, which is really nice.
Possibly when I
Yeah.
first moved to Jamstack, as in terms of like I think it was around 2018, 2019 when I first started like really getting into this is the way I want to build websites now,
Mhm.
I think that was one of the first things is the ability to do hot reloading. And it's like I can use React, but I'm still running code that will either run on a server or be pre-rendered, but I'm hot reloading it. So as I tweak and change things, I can see it instantly in my
Yeah,
browser.
yeah, that's pretty cool. And yeah, next up we have Nuxt, and Nuxt is, you can think of Nuxt as like the Vue version of Next.js. Obviously, it's Vue-based. It also allows you to do static site generation and server-side rendering on a per-page basis. Also has hot reloading and API routes, and it has a module ecosystem. And you can think of modules as like plugins, I'd say. You
Right.
can register a module that does some sort of function or pulls data from something. So that's really
Right.
nice.
Well, yeah, and the Agility CMS, the way you work with Agility CMS and Nuxt is using the Agility CMS
Module.
module for Nuxt, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
nice.
And then last but not least, we have 11t, and 11t is vanilla JavaScript based, which is really nice. Also includes hot reloading and also has a large plugin ecosystem similar to Nuxt. You can just register a plugin and it'll do some sort of function or pull some sort of data from
Right.
somewhere, which is really nice.
So you've got, so yeah, your choices you made is like, I think Next.js is probably the most popular React-based framework. Obviously, I think Gatsby is probably second place now,
Gatsby's, yeah,
but still a really cool framework. But it's definitely for React, and I think by far React is the front-end framework leader in my opinion.
yeah,
And I think even if you're not going to use it, every front-end developer should kind of learn how it works
yeah,
because it has a
for sure.
huge influence on everything else. Um, Nuxt is Vue-based, so Vue.js is another front-end framework. And
Yep.
then 11T comes at it a little bit differently with the idea that you don't need to serve a lot of JavaScript to the front end for the framework necessarily. You can use it as vanilla JS. So it's like the JavaScript for 11T only runs when you build the website and you can serve up anything statically. It doesn't have a front end framework on top of it,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. Awesome. Okay, so what's awesome too is we have a set of starters that utilize that basically get you started with these with Agility CMS. So you can basically build a website in like a minute that's hooked up to a CMS, and you can easily deploy it using any of these starters. Most people choose the Next.js starter, I think, at this point.
Hmm.
A few people choose the other ones. Some folks are into .NET, which is not a Jamstack framework, but you can still do a lot of cool stuff with it. Yeah, definitely get in there.
Yeah.
Figure out what the framework of choice is for you.
Yeah. We're always, working on the starters. If you are working with a framework that you'd like to see Agility, integrated with, feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll be sure to work on something in the near future.
Yeah. Now you had a hand in building all of these starters. You took essentially the same content model
Hmm.
and applied it to all of these starters as kind of like a mini blog template.
Yeah.
And is this where you decided that Next.js was your favorite?
Yeah, yeah. I actually haven't worked with Next.js much before that. I was kind of like a Gatsby fanboy, if you will. Used Gatsby for almost everything, and then I started working with Next.js, and since I was familiar with React already, got the hang of it really quickly,
Mhm.
and just kind of took it and ran ever since. And haven't looked at another
Nice.
framework since.
Yeah. Now I remember when you did the 11T one, you're like, oh, this is cool. I figured
Mhm.
it out. I get it now. It's
Yeah,
neat. It's really interesting. But Angular, you did not enjoy.
yeah. Angular just wasn't for me. I'm not a big Angular guy.
Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, Angular does have a server-side framework that some work with it. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah,
But typically Angular is used more as a front-end framework. So in theory, you could use like a .NET site or even an 11T site and then sort of jack Angular on top of that or
yeah.
Next or React or Vue, right? So you kind of understand that there can be lots of different ways you can mix and match. I
Hmm.
think the beauty of like a Next.js is that it's all in one. You only have
Yeah,
to write the code once, and that's your server side code and your front end code, and it just works.
yeah. Exactly.
Beautiful. All right, so definitely jump in there, try those starters out, and see how they work, and send us some feedback. So now we've picked a framework. We need to decide where to host it, right?
Yep.
And Jamstack sites and apps can be deployed pretty much anywhere, and it could be on the hosting provider you're already using. But also, we could save a lot of money by moving to one that's sort of more modern. And I think the first one we talk about is Azure. So why would I want to host my Jamstack site on Azure?
Yeah, if you're already, using and you're comfortable with Azure, Azure does provide cloud computing services that allow you to host your Jamstack sites, on their system. And it is managed by Microsoft. Everyone knows Microsoft, so it's
Right.
definitely a safe pick for sure.
Yeah. So if you're already in the Azure ecosystem, or you have some sort of compliance and security thing with your organization that requires some of this sort of trust and compliance that Azure already brings, then that's a good choice. I think AWS, I kind of put in the same kind of bucket, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like they're the two main cloud players, and you can host your site on there with a lot of different options.
hmm Yeah.
So those are they're not really old school because cloud is still new for a lot of folks. By the way, we're
Yeah.
not going to talk about you could host them on your own. A lot of companies that we talk to are bringing their stuff out of on-premise hosting into cloud hosting. We're only going to talk about cloud hosting providers. If you want to do on-premise, you can, but that's not the wheelhouse that we're kind of opening up here.
Yeah.
The other one we want to talk about, which is really, really exciting, and I kind of put these two in the same bucket as well, is Vercel and Netlify. And how are these different, Josh, from the Azure and AWS?
Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, I think Vercel uses AWS behind the scenes for some of their stuff. And if you don't know already, Vercel is actually the creators of Next.js, so they're kind of the ones that kind of maintain the Next.js
Mhm.
framework. But yeah, Vercel is an all-in-one platform with global CDN, so you can support your static sites, your Jamstack deployments, even server-side rendered Next.js sites on there as well. And they do provide serverless functions. So we were talking about API routes before, so they do support that as well. And tons of framework support. So you can host a Next.js site on Vercel, which is recommended. But you can also host your Gatsby sites, your Levity site. Pretty much any framework can be hosted on Vercel itself.
Right. And then you have Netlify, which is very, very similar. And you'll
Yeah,
notice from the screenshots that we actually use both Vercel and Netlify. And a lot of the times you can host your site on either of these platforms for free because
yeah,
they have really generous free offerings to get you going on stuff. And it's like to level up, it's not that expensive to go to like a pro plan.
yeah,
The enterprise plans do get more expensive, mostly because of the additional SLA. But both of them, I think the joy to working with Vercel and Netlify, both of them, is that I pointed at my Git repo. I just say, hey, this is my github.com/whatever, and then it automatically rebuilds the site anytime I push to the main branch, which is, to me, it's somewhat magical. It just rebuilds
yeah.
the site, deploys it, and it just works. And if I start a PR, if I have a pull request, it'll actually give me a special build preview URL for
Preview
those
deployment.
as well.
Yeah, that's
Right?
really awesome.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, I didn't have to do anything to get that to work.
hmm
It just does it. And if I'm using a normal sort of Git workflow for building working with my source code on my site, it's a no-brainer. And I think Azure and AWS are kind of playing catch up, right?
Yeah,
They can kind of do that, but not as
not
easily
not
yet.
as well yet. Yeah. One cool thing about Netlify, I actually use Netlify for quite a few of my clients. I
Mhm.
host their sites on Netlify, and one of the cool things is they actually provide forms and form submissions for free
Right.
right out of the box. I think
Yes.
you get 100 form submissions per month, so if it's a pretty small site, I mean that's good enough for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, you basically just kind of wire up an HTML form, add some data attributes to it, and Netlify automatically handles those submissions, and you can wire it up right to an email. So as soon as a form submission comes in, it gets shipped right to your email, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and I think your story as a Jamstack developer is awesome, Josh,
hmm
because you still build websites on the side,
Yep.
for sort of like fun and enjoyment and get paid too. You learned that that's how you learn development to
Yeah.
get started. And then you've joined our team. You do a lot of this kind of stuff, like what I call, developer relations and talking to other developers. And
Yeah.
then you're also a product developer. So you've worked yourself right up the chain, and just by being part of the community and participating in that, that's really awesome.
Yeah. I definitely learned so much from doing all that. So that's great.
Yeah. So if you're that person, if you learn by doing, if you're having fun with it, even if you have lots of questions and you're not sure, reach out to be part of the community. Join our Slack. At the bottom of the website, there's a link to join Slack. I think it's also, what is it, agilitysmells.com/join Slack. Put
Yeah,
that on
something like
there.
that.
Join our Slack community, reach out, and hey, who knows? You might end up actually working for the agility team at some point,
Yeah.
because we're always looking for great developers. But I think for folks who are building websites too, using Jamstack is just another way to kind of level up what you're going to do.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is the time when we have any questions. Any questions from anybody sort of out there listening? Ask them now. Oh, this is a good one. Are there any testing automation tools you would recommend to integrate with agility? So that's a great question. And have you tackled this one before, Josh?
I actually haven't. I know we do get asked this quite a lot, but I haven't myself, implemented any testing or automation tools. Have you?
So yeah, absolutely. So this is one where it tends to be a little later on in the process when
Yeah,
people are they sort of, hey, the first thing is like, hey, we need to get our site deployed. We need to get phase
yeah.
one out there and working. But for automated testing, typically that's done as part of your DevOps. Okay, so when your site sort of builds and does any sort of that initial build, sort of like we're going to push to get, we're going to build the site, and then we're going to do some testing before it actually goes live. So the
Mhm.
DevOps will tend to run on a PR's build. So you do a pull request, it's going to do some sort of testing. First of all, does the site build at all? That's the
Mhm.
first test,
Yeah.
because if it doesn't build, so everyone has that. But the other one is you can have lighthouse tests that run. So there's automated lighthouse tests that can run as part of your DevOps. So
Yeah, I
that's
think
important.
yeah, I think Vercel also has an integration with Lighthouse. You can just
It
add it right
does.
to your deployment and it'll just kind of, yeah, it's
So
pretty
it'll
cool.
tell you beforehand what your new Lighthouse score is going to be on like your homepage,
Hmm.
before you deploy, and you can have it say, you know what, if I'm under 60 or 70 or something like that, and we don't like it, then you can not deploy that. But there's tons of other ones. There's accessibility tests that you can run, and all of these are like as npm packages that have command line interfaces, so they can be part of your DevOps. And so they're not really, that's not an agility specific answer. What that does is mean that the content that's in agility can go through all these tests before it actually goes live on the website. And you can have your own tests that are run as part of these as well. So, in your Git project, you can write, tests, and those can be triggered using npm test. Um, is there an accessibility linting in agility as you are developing? So what I would do is have that as a test that runs on your PRs, that's
Hmm.
going to run when you have your code. And if you want that to run as you're developing, then you'd probably hook that up to a webhook so that every time you change some content, it's going to run that test on your website. So, and an interesting thing is the accessibility is not necessarily due to what's in the content. Sometimes it is. For instance, like if you have an image tag that you forget to put the alt attribute
Hmm.
and stuff like that. But a lot more of it is just how you build the website. So that's why
Yeah.
these tests tend to be run as part of the DevOps, right?
Yeah, and regarding linting, back to Next.js, they actually have a CLI tool. If you run like yarn lint, it'll just scan through your whole project and kind of let you know if there's been an error. If you using default image tag instead of a next image, it'll throw an error for that and tell you, hey, you should probably upgrade this to, have better performance on your website. So that's definitely a cool tool in Next.js.
Right. So that's as you're developing, you can run it locally,
Yeah,
and then if you want to implement that as part of your DevOps, you could actually have that run, and you can have it as part of your testing too.
yeah,
Just to add another chain in your DevOps, either as a GitHub action or as part of like Vercel as well. So lots of different ways you can sort of put other tools in your pipeline to help you do that. And that's another good reason to use something like Next.js, because it just has so much stuff out of the box, zero configuration, just
yeah.
go with it, and it just works. Uh, does a lot for you. Pretty cool. What are the
Great
other
questions.
frameworks? Are there any other frameworks kind of coming along that you are looking at, Josh, or changes to the Next.js framework that are sort of exciting to you?
Yeah, there's some pretty big changes in Next.js that I was reading a blog article on. But another one I've been keeping my eye on was Remix. I haven't used it too much, but I've been hearing a lot about it on Twitter. Been reading some things, and seems like it's pretty gaining a lot of traction. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is React 18 is a new version of React that just came out. I haven't started using it because a lot of the packages that I use aren't really supported on it yet.
Compatible,
It's kind of
yeah.
beta. But does React 18 support in Next.js 12 or 12.1 or something like that?
Hmm.
But then Remix uses a lot of the same concepts that are coming out in React 18 with the idea of server rendering and streaming the components. And it just gives a whole nother level of sort of performance
Yeah.
to your website. So pretty cool. Oh, you got another
So
question.
your clients use the chatbot on the website. So I've actually worked with a couple of chatbots. I've used the free one from HubSpot, which is actually really good, and just implemented that on a Next.js site super easily. But also, if any of your clients are using like Facebook, for example, you can actually hook up the Facebook messaging chat. If they have like a Facebook group, you can actually hook up that Facebook group messenger right on their website. And it can automate some of the messages and go straight to your clients' messaging tools, which is also really cool.
Yeah, so that kind of depends on what framework you're using.
Yeah,
So some of these things, they can be like, sometimes you could put them in um, just using like a Google Tag Manager.
yeah,
If you have a Google Tag Manager already on there, you can add the chatbot onto there. Sometimes there's an npm package for like React or whatever that
yeah.
can put that. The chatbots are typically a front end technology, though, right? They're going to go onto the
Hmm.
front end and
The
not
front end.
necessarily affect the back end of your website,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Oh,
So great. So,
Zendesk was another one that we used. Yeah, I
yeah,
just
well,
remember now.
We use Zendesk ourselves in
Yeah.
our own application. We use Intercom on our own website, so there's a bunch of stuff going on in there that you can do, and but tons of great chat spots. I'd love to hear about them. If you want to, Hitesh, if you want to tell us that story,
Oh, that's a good question,
reach out.
Joe.
Yeah.
In
Ooh,
which
which
situations would
situation?
you not want to use Jamstack?
You know what? I don't have any anymore. It pretty much for me, it's not about whether I would use it or not use it, mostly because I don't want I want to have the ability for front end developers to be able to build my website. I don't want to have a full stack developer get involved necessarily, because I think a full stack developer, they should be focusing on more on middle tier and back end. So really what I've started to see, especially on bigger sites with our enterprise customers, most of our customers are enterprise customers at this point, or kind of getting into there as they grow, is to segment the development, to build API. So if a customer has like a service, their own identity, their own databases somewhere, is to say, okay, let's build an API on top of those pieces. For instance, Cineplex, they have their own API to access their movies in their theaters and their ticketing,
Right.
right? So they have their API that sits separately from the website, and then they have the website development, which is actually a different team. So you don't want to use Jamstack necessarily if you're building an API if you're just building an API. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't use Next.js just to build an API. I would use like another backend framework and something that I'm more familiar with or my team's familiar with. Something like a .NET or Web API, or you could build it on top of Express or whatever. That's not really
Hmm.
Jamstack. But if it is a website itself, then I almost always pick yes. I wouldn't necessarily choose Jamstack for an app. You can build an app using a Jamstack technologies, especially if you want to do like what do they call them again?
Progressive web app or
PWO, yeah,
PWA. Yeah.
PWA, a progressive web app. You can build that in Jamstack, but you don't have to. So really interesting how you can mix and match the frameworks, and so it's a great question, I think, and a lot of, and you know what, if you're still not comfortable with it, if you're like, you know what, really like PHP, I'm gonna use PHP forever, then build your site using PHP, and then think about how you can make it secure, and do all those other things, because we say it's a better development experience. That's an opinion.
Hmm.
That's our opinion. It's our
Yeah.
opinion for our experiences. If your experiences are different from that, use a different framework. I mean, uh, I've been a .NET guy for more than 20 years. It took me about 10 minutes and I definitely had like several minutes in a conversation with some other colleagues of, I think this is a terrible idea. JavaScript is not fast. It's never going to work well. This is a bad idea. To, oh my gosh, this is a really good idea.
Yeah.
Like, I can code a lot faster using JavaScript than I can with all the other tooling that I would need to get a website out in .NET.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
These are
Great
great
questions.
questions.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Hitesh. Cool. Any other stuff from you, Josh, or just stuff off the top of your head that sort of Jamstack happenings that are occurring now that you think are important?
Um, it's a good question. I mean, I'd just say if you haven't at least checked out the Jamstack, definitely, take a stab at it. Even just to see if you like it or not. I mean, it's great technology, great set of tools. Um, Definitely keep your eye on Next.js. They're doing a lot of big things. Um,
But you can start
a lot of big
small.
things. Yeah, start small. Exactly,
Start
start
small.
small.
Start with the starter. So we said
Yeah,
our link to the starter. Start with
exactly.
that. Pick it
Start with the
apart.
starter.
Look at how that works,
Yeah, and that's
and
what the
think.
great thing. That's the great thing about the starters. You can essentially take the starter, pick it apart, see what you need, see what you don't need, and kind of just swap things around.
Yeah. And then as you need more things, and as you're trying to figure out, how do I do authentication? How do I do like forms?
Mhm.
Then you can start to dig in and get a little bit more specific And that can help you choose your framework or choose the other APIs that you're going to use to compose your service that you're going to create.
Yeah.
And so that kind of research can go really deep, and definitely that's when you would want to get involved with us deeper to say, hey, look, should I use Typeform or FormStack, or should I use, how do I work with my Salesforce or my HubSpot or that kind of thing. That's a great part of the onboarding process with Agility, is we help compose all those services together that you're going to use to build your website.
Yep. Cool.
Well, that was a great talk. I really
Yeah.
love talking about Jamstack, Josh.
Yeah, that was fun.
Awesome.
Enjoyed that.
Okay, so definitely reach out to us on Twitter. The Agility Twitter handle is @AgilityCMS. That's a good one. Join that the Slack community, agilitysms.com/join Slack. Get in touch, and let's keep this conversation going. Let's make the community bigger.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, Josh. It's been great talking to you. Take care.
Yeah, cheers. Take care, everyone.